Look at the map right now. Go ahead. Find the United States. It is an absolute unit. It commands a fifth of the world's wealth and boasts a military budget larger than the next 10 nations combined. It is the unchallenged global hegemon. But this isn't the natural order of things. Imagine traveling back to 1783. The United States of America is a coastal strip of land, broke, politically fractured, and stuck between the dominant world powers Britain, France, and Spain. They were an afterthought, a political experiment run by idealistic farmers who didn't even agree on what the country times was asterisk. If you told someone in London or Paris in 1783 that this scrawny, indebted adolescent nation would, in 200 years, become the master of the planet, they would have laughed you out of the drawing room. Yet, here we are. This isn't a story about destiny. This is a story about geography, audacity, industrial output, and a staggering amount of geopolitical good luck. This is the story of how America pulled off the greatest 200-year real estate and corporate takeover in history. And it started with a purchase that would make Jeff Bezos blush. The first step in becoming a superpower is realizing your neighbors are bad at real estate. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson did something that defined American history more than any constitution ever could. He bought the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon for $15 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $340 million today. Let that sink in. For the price of a mid-tier NBA contract, the U.S. instantly doubled its size, gaining 828,000 square miles of pristine, resource-rich land. It was the bargain of the millennium. Napoleon needed cash for his endless European wars and didn't have the logistical bandwidth to hold on to North America. This wasn't diplomacy. This was a fire sale. The U.S. wasn't strong enough to take the land by force, but they were rich enough to buy it while France was distracted. The rest of the continental expansion was simply maximizing that initial advantage. Look at the map again. Florida was pried from a weak, distracted Spain. Texas was wrestled from a newly independent Mexico, sparking a war that resulted in the U.S. gobbling up California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and parts of 4 other states. They called this Manifest Destiny. We should call it Aggressive Expansion Protocol 1. The founders weren't just politicians. They were early-stage venture capitalists. They knew that power wasn't just about population. It was about space, resources, and defensible borders. By 1848, the U.S. had conquered a continent. And the most important part? They had achieved geopolitical isolation. They were bordered by 2 weak nations, Canada, under British but not aggressive control, and Mexico, and 2 vast protective oceans, while Europe was a crowded, volatile deathmatch, a geopolitical cul-de-sac where every border change meant war. America was a self-contained sandbox, overflowing with coal, iron, timber, and oil. The critical difference was that no major foreign power could reach them, and even if they did, the supply lines were impossible. They had room to grow, and boy, did they grow. Continental domination gave the U.S. the resources, but industrial capacity gave it the muscle. Between the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the turn of the century, America went from an agrarian society to the greatest industrial engine the world had ever seen. This period, often called the Gilded Age, was messy, brutal, and unequal. But strategically, it was the single most vital component in the superpower recipe. While European powers were spending their wealth building competing empires and vast standing armies to face off against each other over tiny African colonies, the U.S. was focused internally. It was building railroads. By 1900, America's rail network was larger than all of Europe's combined. This wasn't just transportation, this was unification. It meant that resources, coal from Pennsylvania, iron ore from Minnesota, cotton from the South, could be shipped efficiently to massive production centers in the Midwest. The sheer scale was staggering. By 1913, the United States was producing 1/3 of the world's industrial output. Let me say that again. One nation, producing more steel, coal, and oil than Germany, France, and Great Britain combined. This is the hidden key. You cannot be a global superpower if you cannot outproduce your rivals. And here, America had a secret weapon. The American consumer. The U.S. had a massive, unified internal market protected by high tariffs. They didn't have to ship their goods across volatile oceans to compete. They sold them right here. This fueled scale, reduced costs, and created vast pools of capital in the hands of industrialists like Carnegie and Rockefeller. Think of the economy as a car. Europe was a fleet of highly tuned, but small, luxury vehicles constantly bumping into each other on a crowded road. America was a monster truck. Slow to start, but once it hit the accelerator, absolutely unstoppable. But a monster truck stuck in the garage doesn't win races. It needed a global track. By the 1,890 seconds, the U.S. was too wealthy and too powerful to remain isolated. They had solved the continental problem. Now, they developed main character energy. The trigger? A short, decisive, and manufactured conflict. The Spanish-American War of 1898. This war was critical because it shifted America's psychological boundaries. Up until then, isolationism was the dominant policy. Now, led by aggressive expansionists like Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, the U.S. decided it was time to play empire. Spain was collapsing, and the U.S. saw opportunity. In a few months, the U.S. military seized Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, thousands of miles away from the mainland. The U.S. had gone from continental dominance to genuine global player overnight. It also highlighted the naval necessity of the Panama Canal. Roosevelt famously said, "I took the canal zone." It's an almost perfect summation of U.S. foreign policy at the time. Find a problem, declare it yours, and build the infrastructure necessary to maintain power. The Panama Canal, finished in 1914, was a geopolitical cheat code. It allowed the American fleet to move instantly between the Atlantic and Pacific, multiplying its naval power without having to build two separate fleets. They had their resource base, they had their industrial might, they had their logistical bottleneck fixer. They were now standing on the sidelines, warmed up and ready to play in the global championship. And in 1914, the championship started. This is the ultimate historical pivot point. If you want to know how America became the superpower, forget the founding fathers for a minute and focus on the two world wars. World War I was a financial and demographic catastrophe for Europe. The UK, France, and Germany poured everything they had: men, capital, resources into a 3-year grinding meat grinder. The US watched and sold. When the US finally entered the war in 1917, it wasn't due to overwhelming external threat. It was to protect their investments and ensure the democratic future they preferred. They spent just 18 months in active combat before the armistice. The result? The US didn't suffer massive destruction or generational loss. Instead, European powers incurred massive debts to the United States. America essentially mortgaged Europe's future. The balance of power shifted from London and Paris to New York. WWI was the rehearsal. World War II was the checkmate. When World War II began in 1939, the US played the role of the arsenal of democracy. While Britain was bombed, France was occupied, and the Soviet Union endured the horror of the Eastern Front. The American industrial base was churning out ships, tanks, and planes on a scale that defies comprehension. Detroit built more tanks than all of Germany. U.S. shipyards launched a new Liberty ship every day. Crucially, because of those protective oceans we discussed, America suffered almost zero infrastructure damage. While every major industrial city in Europe and Asia was reduced to rubble, American factories were running all the time, safe and sound. When the dust settled in 1945, the situation was breathtakingly stark. The U.S. possessed 50% of the world's manufacturing capacity, 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, and, critically, a monopoly on nuclear weapons. The old world was gone. The new world was built on American capital, American production, and American security guarantees. There was no competition. There was the U.S., and there was everyone else desperate for U.S. aid, U.S. goods, and the security umbrella provided by the U.S. military. The post-war global framework, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank were not negotiated between equals. They were established by the victor to ensure the stability of the American-led global economic order. The Cold War cemented this status. The ideological battle with the Soviet Union provided the necessary external justification for something unprecedented: the permanent global military footprint. The U.S. currently operates around 800 military bases in 70 countries. Think about that for a second. 800 bases. Not only does this protect global shipping lanes and deter rivals, but it functions as a massive, subsidized security service for American economic interests worldwide. This superpower status is the result of 3 specific historical ingredients, baked perfectly. First, geography. The vast, resource-rich, and ocean-protected continental shield. Second, industrialization. A scale of production unmatched by any competitor, fueled by a unified internal market. Third, timing. The good fortune of having European rivals destroy themselves in 2 successive wars, allowing the US to step into a vacuum as the undisputed financial and military leader. Was this success inevitable? Absolutely not. It required ruthless ambition, brilliant diplomacy, like the Louisiana Purchase, and a willingness to leverage massive industrial capability when the rest of the world was exhausted. But history rarely waits for those who are unprepared. And America, thanks to 200 years of aggressive expansion and opportune timing, was ready to seize the 20th century. The question now isn't how America became a superpower. We know the recipe. The question is, how long can they hold on to it when the rest of the world finally learns to cook?